I'm just gonna be honest right here, right now. The 2018 Grinch film from Illumination is awful. I'm not saying this because you think I'm some biased Illumination hater or I don't like book adaptations or something like that. No. I can perfectly buy an adaptation from a book as long as it's done right. But The Grinch has got to be one of the worst adaptations from a book that I have ever seen in my life. I cannot begin to describe how annoyed I was feeling while I was watching this movie at the cinema. I'm honestly ashamed that I had to pay $12 to see this movie. I gave them money for this worthless, unnecessary film from a story that was already fine enough on its own. Okay, I need to calm myself down. Before we actually get into anything extreme, I suppose we should talk about what this movie is actually about. For those of you who have never heard of The Grinch before, it's the story about this green, hairy man who lives on the mountain and he hates Christmas. He hates it when it's celebrated, so he decides that he's going to steal Christmas from Whoville, run by these people known as the Who. So when you lay that story out on a piece of paper and plan that for a movie, it doesn't sound so bad. And it's right, because the original story was fine on its own, so turning it into a movie is a very difficult thing to do given that the story was only a few pages long and now you're turning it into an hour-and-a-half movie. But at the very least you gotta at least make sure that everything makes sense, everything that's a part of the story is there so that we understand the message and point of it. But with this movie, they take that plot and turn it into something absolutely pointless. So before I actually get to that, let's talk about a few minor things. Visually speaking, this movie looks admittedly gorgeous. It's probably the best looking movie that Illumination has ever done. All the effort into the art style, the colors, the designs, it all looks really good and I think this is very Seuss-like in many ways. However, I'm not a fan of how the Grinch actually looks. He doesn't look like the Grinch that's described in the song. He doesn't look like the same one that I've become associated with in the original story. He looks very clean and soft, which is not exactly the kind of Grinch I'm expecting to see most of the time. The instrumental soundtrack is okay. It's not one of the best things Danny Elfman's done, but I think it sounds fine enough. That being said, the actual songs in this movie are pretty damn awful. I mean, there's a fucking rap version of the Grinch song. It's gonna become dated. It's annoying, and I hate it whenever they do this. This movie also has a B-plot involving Cindy Lou from the original story. Now, in the original story, she was just mostly a 2-year-old little girl who wasn't really a main character, but was important to the story. In this film, nope, she's a main character, and honestly, she doesn't really feel very important to the story. Her B-plot involves her wanting her single mum to be less depressed on Christmas because she works so hard. And instead of the innocent 2-year-old girl we got in the original story, they turned her into a very sporty, energized girl who reminds me of one of the girls from Despicable Me. There is nothing wrong with making a relatable kid character who acts normally. By having them acting all sporty and energetic, that's not exactly going to be relatable to all age groups. And while the scenes with Cindy Lou and her mum are admittedly adorable, these scenes also fail to show me exactly how her mum is depressed. She barely looks depressed in this movie. Most of the time she's a very happy, full of life mother. There's like 2 scenes in the beginning where she's looking frustrated or sleepy, but that's it. After that, she looks perfectly fine. So I have a hard time believing that she's even depressed to begin with. Okay, so taking that all in, it doesn't sound like that bad of a movie, right? Well, to me, there's 2 things that completely ruin this movie for me. The point of the story and the characterization of the Grinch. In the original story, the Grinch hated Christmas because of the greed. He thought that all the Who's loving Christmas was all greedy, and that's all they cared about, and that's what really annoyed him. So he thought, if I steal Christmas, then we'll see how they celebrate Christmas now. And maybe, just maybe, the Who's will actually celebrate Christmas without all those toys and food, because maybe Christmas means a little bit more. That's the whole point of the original plot. But in this movie, they completely killed that. Like, they threw it out the window and into a trash can. The main point of this movie is that the Grinch is sad. He was alone on Christmas. He was an orphan. That's why he hated Christmas. He was just alone. He wanted to celebrate Christmas like all the other kids. And look, I have nothing wrong with a movie changing up its story to fill in a new runtime. You know, maybe they want to offer a new way of experiencing the story that's not necessarily all 100% predictable. miserable like you thought it would be. The problem is that they still implying that, oh, he's very miserable because maybe his heart is way too small, but he's actually not like that throughout the movie. And that brings me on to my second problem. It's the Grinch's characterization. In the original story, and I know I've said this a lot throughout this review, he's, well, a Grinch. He's an unredeemable asshole who abuses his dog and wanting to get his way. He's a very unredeemable character, but he's not like that in this movie. He's a very level-headed, calm, nice character. I mean, sure, he can do asshole things sometimes, but he's not like a great, unredeemable asshole. He kind of reminds me of Gru from Despicable Me, so it's incredibly hard for me to believe that his heart grew 3 sizes towards the end because nothing about him changes. He acted exactly the same throughout the whole movie. He was not this unredeemable person. There's plenty of scenes where he's like, "Aw, that's very nice," or "Oh, I like that," and plenty of scenes where he's being nice to his dog Max. So the question is, why are you implying that the Grinch is very miserable and he hates everything when you're also going to miss the point of the story to begin with? That's annoyingly inconsistent. You know, I may not like the Jim Carrey Grinch that much, and I will admit it also kind of misses the point of the story as well, by having the Grinch being bully being the main reason he hates Christmas. That's not exactly the point. But at the very least in that one, the Grinch actually felt like a Grinch, and by the time his heart actually grew 3 sizes, I believed it, which is not the case with this movie. Not only do they try to change the Grinch's personality, but by trying to keep that same story in there, while also trying to offer a different point on what this story is supposed to mean, it's inconsistent. It may think it's telling the story fine, but it's really not to me. It feels like a bastardized version of the Grinch, one that I would not follow at all. That's why I hate this movie so much, because it feels so inconsistent, while also shoving in all of this pointless stuff that does not matter to the story. If you're gonna change things about it, then don't bother. There's no point. The Grinch on its own is fine. Did it really need a movie? I'm sure there's dozens of books you could have turned into movies and maybe they could have actually been really good, but no, let's just make an adaptation of the Grinch because everybody loves the Grinch. Honestly, at the end of the day, I see this movie as nothing more than a joke. It does not feel like a movie to me. It doesn't feel like the same story. It all feels like a Robot Chicken sketch that was stretched out to an hour and a half, except it's geared towards kids. If you're someone who's never seen this movie before, and whether you're a die-hard Grinch fan or not, just don't bother. Don't bother watching this movie. In fact, I'd rather prefer watching the Jim Carrey version, which, again, despite not being good, at least did other things better than how this movie did it. I'm always gonna love the original Grinch story, continue watching the original Chuck Jones short many times, but I won't have this movie to thank for that story.